Is it a short daf?
It's a short tub. I was thinking.
Hey, we should go ahead to
It's
get
Friday,
cover.
because I want to finish on Friday the whole daf.
Oi, shh.
Okay, it's not that hard. Must make it like. You must make it like.
Oh, we're on twice, are we? I think we might be on twice.
No.
It's fine. We're good. Okay.
Happy to hear the girls gone off now.
Don't show him how I I'm cute.
Okay, let's get going. Thank you very much. We're up to with Basim with Aleph, the top line. We were discussing yesterday like this. You're not allowed to eat chometz from the 7th hour. That's from Chatzos onwards. That is awesome in Hatir to eat. And you're not allowed Yehuda. How long before Midrabanon is it forbidden? Shittas Rameir is they gave 1 hour. 1 hour before the time which is awesome in Hatir, and Midrabanon it is forbidden. Shittas Rav Yehuda is they did 2 hours. 2 hours before it's forbidden to eat, and 1 hour it's forbidden to have pleasure. There's seemingly, what's the logic of the Machlekes of Rav Yehuda? What would you say?
Less time for mistakes.
Right, less people, even without the modern day convenience of watches, how likely are they to get the wrong time? Right? How likely are they to get the wrong time? That's Machlekes of Rav Yehuda. And the Gemara leaves our topic in Hilchos Pesach and goes on to Hilchos Eidos. So eventually we'll come back and connect the two sukkahs. But for most of today, we'll be talking about Eidos. So we had a story where 2 Eidim came along and they said the wrong 2 different hours. One said the 2nd hour, one said the 3rd hour. What's the halacha? We believe them. Why, if one says the 2nd hour, one says the 3rd hour, we believe them? Right. They got mixed up. If they said the 3rd hour and the 5th hour, Rameir says they're not believed. Rabbi Yehuda says they are believed. That was the last thing we learned. Rameir says they're not believed if they're out by 2 hours, if it's discrepancy. That's Reuben and Shimon come along and say, we saw Levi killing Yehuda. And we say to Reuben, okay, so what time did you see Levi killing Yehuda? And he says, I saw it at the 3rd hour. And then we ask Shimon, what time did you see? He says on the 5th hour. And we don't believe them. We consider this Eidos to be a contradicted Eidos, and we ignore them according to Rabbi Yehuda. Sorry, according to Rameir. According to Rameir, let's get the summary clear. And according to Rameir, we do believe them unless they are 3 hours out. And Rameir himself agreed that if one of them says the 5th hour, one of them says, which Rameir holds is normal for people to make the mistake, but by 2 hour gap for the 5th hour and the 7th hour, he says people don't make that mistake. What's the difference between the 3rd hour and the 5th hour to the 5th hour and the 7th hour? The sun. Because the 3rd and the 5th hour, you can't really tell because you're looking in the sky, you can see the sun rising. You can't tell if it's before midday or after midday. Which in the 5th hour and the 7th hour, it's very easy to tell because you can see the sun's already getting into the west. So that's what we learned. Abai came along with 2 versions as to explain the machlokes between Rameir and Rabbi Yehuda. And what Abai does, I think that I asked the question, makes 2 assumptions. Assumption number 1 is that when the person said the 3rd hour, meant to say the last minute of the 3rd hour. And the one who said the 5th hour meant to say the 1st minute of the 5th hour, which means that actually, technically, they're only about an hour or 2-3 minutes apart. That was the first assumption Abai said. And the second assumption Abai said is that when men of Yehuda are arguing, how much do people make mistakes? In this first version, he says that both make a mistake, and therefore it's a very small mistake. Each one makes a very small, like half an hour or something. The second version, only one of them makes a mistake, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, makes a mistake of 1 hour, according to Rameir, 2 hours. Now, regarding the fact that people make a mistake, that's understandable. Why? Because that is something which is impossible to verify. You can't say to them, are you sure it was the 3rd hour? You never had a watch on. You said it's the 3rd hour. We can't verify afterwards. And since we know, the Gemara in Sanhedrin proves that the majority of people make mistakes. So therefore, we can follow the conclusion that they probably made a mistake. But regarding the other assumption, that the one who said the third hour meant the very last minute of the third hour, and the one who said the fifth hour meant the very first minute of the fifth hour, you already asked the question, why do you make such an assumption? Say to him on the third hour, can you be a bit more precise? Was the beginning of the third hour, the middle of the third hour, the end of the third hour? Why don't we take the time to find out? And then if the aide says, by the way, I meant the very beginning of the third hour, and the other one says, well, I actually meant the very end of the fifth hour, then in fact they're 3 hours apart, which even according to everybody would agree is no good. So therefore, why do we make the effort to find out? That is what Rava's challenges to Abaye. So let's look more inside. Ozal Rav Huna. Rav Huna went top of the base with Aleph Rav Yehuda. Omar Ishmael made the Rava repeated over this Gemara which Abaye said to Rava. So Omar, so Rava said, we have to sort out the computer, you knocked out of it. It's a big pain. We have to find a long-term solution. Maybe salary, you ask him every day. You must do this every day? You're not sure. We'll see. Okay. You can. Okay, we'll see. Omar said, so Rava said, I don't like what you have to say. Omar, if we would be medactic, if we would verify with these aided, the one who said the third hour, if we would actually bother to find out, we would find out that the reality is he's saying the third hour means early, he says the light hour, the third hour means 8. We should kill him from a suffix. That we have a mitzvah to try and save the person. We know this many times. We do not kill somebody until we are sure about it. So surely there's a mitzvah to try our best to save. So what's going on? It's if we don't get this clear, the whole next Gemara will be much harder. So it's very good to get the basics clear. Again, let's get the story straight. Two Aiden come to Beis, and they say we saw somebody killing somebody. A Ritzeach went and he killed somebody. So it's a horrified. Right, let's hear the details. The first person says it happened on the third hour. The second person said it happened on the fifth hour. So Abaye said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Abaye, it's not believed. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it is believed. Says Abaye, what's the logic? That people make a mistake of 2 hours. Says Rava, what's going on? Sorry, not the 1 hour. Sorry. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they make a 1 hour mistake. Sorry, that's wrong. According to Abaye, according to Rabbi Yehuda, they make an hour mistake. And why is an hour mistake good enough? He said the third hour, he said the fifth hour. Why is an hour good enough? Because that's not how right. That's the first version. The second version is because when he said the third hour, he meant the end of the third hour, instead of the beginning of the fifth hour. And then Moshe, you ask him. So again, according to Abaye is saying that they made a 1 hour mistake, and therefore he's believed. Why? Because when he said the third hour, meant the end of the third hour, instead of the fifth hour. Says Rava, what kind of basin is this? That they're going to kill somebody without even finding out whether he meant the third time at the beginning or the end. Rather, no, we take the worst case scenario. What's the worst case scenario? That the one who said 3 meant the beginning of the third, the one who said the fifth meant the end of the fifth. And Afa Bikain, we say that they are believed. Why? Yes, it could be we're quitting a murder. Right. So nevertheless, it's believed. Right. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we only believe them if he says 2 and 3. Then we believe them because a person makes a mistake up to 2 hours. If he says 3 and 5, we don't believe. Why? Because it's possible to be a 3-hour mistake. According to Rameh, a person makes a mistake up to 3 hours. Okay. And now Rava explains himself. It's about 10 lines from the top. The story happened. It happened at the beginning. This is the first case where Rabbi Yehuda says they believed. When they argue about the second and the third. One's making a mistake just under 2 hours. So again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, 2 hours. According to Rameir, if one says 3 and one says 5, they believe because we assume that person makes a mistake up to 3 hours. So now, we learned in the Mishnah and Sanhedrin. Or you saw on the Bach says them, the Sheva Chakiros, the 7 Chakiros. And what are the 7 Chakiros? There is a Shavua. Shavua over here does not mean a week. It means which 7-year period, or which Shemitah of nowadays we don't have it, but nowadays every Shemitah was counted as which one of the Shemitahs of the year. But you had the first Shemitah of the year, the second Shemitah of the 50 years. There is a Shana which year, there is a Chodesh which month, there Kama B'Chodesh which day in the month, there is a Yom which day, there is a Shah which hour, there is a Mokim on which place.
Were these to ask whether the person knew when the thing happened, or is it to find out if he was a clever guy?
Yes, that's a very good question.
Because if
I was asking, let's say he comes to base says, yesterday I saw somebody killing somebody. So which day of the month it is? Okay, so he says, I have absolutely no idea which day of the month it is. Nope. It's Exer Kostov. The Eidim actually have to know which day of the month it is. Yes, they have to know which. In the olden days, people did rely. It's like asking nowadays what the English date it is. People are aware. Okay.
Also, he's asking which decade was it kind of thing. Not decade,
Well, yeah, which 7-year period? Yes, and if he says yesterday it happened, yeah.
So I'm saying
Yeah, it is.
Got to know which 7-year period we're in now.
Yeah.
So you got to know what cycle. Huh?
No, but over here, it first comes in and says, last week I saw Reuben killing Shimon. So we say to him, which 7-year cycle of the Shemitah it is. What do you, I told you it happened last week. And the 7-year cycle only changes every 7 years. So you're going to have to, the answer is yes, he has to know it. He has to know it. So the Gemara says like this. The Tanya is a mistake. It's not a Bryce, it's a Mishnah. Ma bin chakiros the bedikas. Bedikas, Rashi gives us many examples. What clothes was the Rotzeach wearing, or the Niltzach wearing? What weapon did he use? Chakiros, I don't know. It is some betela. Bedikas. They're checking. If they both say we don't know, it doesn't kayemes. It's a very strange thing. That means if they both say we don't know which weapon he used to kill, we don't know if he used a gun or a knife, then that's good enough. Yes. Oh, the God was.
I don't know what the date.
Right. Oh, so the like Bob explains it a bit. Oh, so we ask, what nafke I just want. Okay. I missed out one point, which is that we'll come back to it again and again. It's the case. According to Amir, person makes. Let me ask you this question. Let's see if you can. According to Amir, what's the normal person? Sorry, according to Rabbi Yehuda, what's a normal mistake that a person makes? How much does a person mistaken usually by? According to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, what does a normal person make a mistake by? According to Rabbi Yehuda. Bible says 3 hours. Rabbi Yehuda says 3 hours. Rabbi according to Rabbi Yehuda is 3 hours. Okay. Wait a second. Rabbi says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, people make a mistake of 3 hours. So if one person says 3 and one person says 5, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we believe them. Why do you believe them?
Even the worst case.
Even the worst case, they're not contradicting each other because people make a 3-hour mistake. So I ask you a question. What if one says it happened 1 hour, one person they had happened the 5th hour? So then they're not believed. Why not believed? Because it's more than 3 hours. I ask you, maybe it happened in the middle. Maybe it happened on the 3rd hour. And then neither of them are making more than a 3-hour mistake. So let's believe them on that assumption.
It's kind of unlikely, as you say, 3 hours total.
You're right. You're 90% of the way there. Just 10% more. What? You said it. That then you'd have to come to the conclusion that they both made a 3-hour mistake, and that we don't see. That means we prefer. This is what we said yesterday. The difference between the two lashonos of Abba. We are satisfied that one person may have made a mistake of up to 3 hours. We don't believe that 2 people make a mistake, and even that the second person makes a mistake of 1 hour, because we don't allow for 4-hour distance. We allow for 3 hours because we say like this: one of them got it right, and the other one made a 3-hour mistake. It's unlikely that 2 people make a mistake. It's very important. Tesis actually works this through the top tesis over here. Okay. Right. Okay. Tesis also asks the kasha. Let's go one more point. If one person says it was the 1st hour, one person says it was the 4th hour, you just said to me that we don't believe them. Why? It's more than a 3-hour mistake. For Tesis, it's not necessarily more than a 3-hour mistake. Let's ask them. Rava said to Abai, let's ask them. We'll ask the one who said it was on the first hour, and we'll say to, by the way, is it possible when you say 1, you mean 1? Some people say to be there in 10 minutes, and so it means an hour. So when you say 1, do you mean 1:59? And the other one who said 4, you don't mean the 4:59, you mean 4:1. And if that's the case, it's actually not even 3 hours apart. It's just 2 hours, 3 minutes apart. No, it's not. There's not 2 mistakes. It's not a mistake at all. No, it's just the weren't speaking accurate. It's different from the mistake and accurate. When he said 4, it means 4:1. When he said 1. No, Rava said to Abaya, you're making 2 assumptions. One is that they meant as close as possible, plus they make that mistake. So Rava says, let's ask them. So this asks according to you, Rava, as well. When you say there's a 4-hour gap, you don't kill him. Why? Because nobody makes 4-hour mistakes. So let's ask them, and then there won't be that 4-hour mistake. Tosa says we only ask to save. We don't ask to make it kuladik. That means the Adam came along. He said 1. He said 4. We just take it at face value, and we don't bother to go the effort of asking just in order to be able to kill something. That's an important point. There's 2 points I want to say from Tosa. One is that we don't assume that both made mistakes, and we don't ask the question to verify, to try and push the Adis together in order to be able to kill. Now the Mishnah says there's 7 chakiras and as many bedikas as you want. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that lechatchila you should ask as many bedikas as you can. The Gemara says that there was a certain Tana that said I'd ask so many bedikas that no aid would get through. Now, the aid always has an option to say what? I don't know, and he'll be okay. So what's the point of asking bedikas? It's only if they actually contradict each other. So if one says I don't know which clothes he wore, another one says he wore white, that's fine. If he says no, he wore green, he says he wore purple, and then we say no, that's no good. So what? If they contradict each other, it's no good. But chakiras, even if one of them says he doesn't know, it's no good. It's like this.
There's a big contrast between, let's say, if you just give an example, I know it's a bit semantic, but let's say the light is dark, it's dark enough outside. See, he's wearing like a dark coloured jumper. Is that called enough of a contradiction?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, when we get to Sanhedrin, maybe we'll get to it. Good question. Good question. Vavinon boy, should put you on the Sanhedrin, and then you can start asking these questions. Vavinon boy, it's good question. Vavinon boy, more asks. Why is chakiras if somebody says he doesn't know that we cancel the whole thing because we say it matters? The concept which we have in Makkah is called has Eidim Zemin. Eidim Zemin is a unique case because normally when you have Eidim, and Eidim come along and argue with them, in 99% of cases it's called the Eidos Mukheshes, contradicted Eidos, and nothing happens. For example, I say woman killed Shimon, and you say no he didn't, or I say, for example, woman killed Shimon man, and you say he didn't. So we're left with nothing, we can't believe. Eidim Zemin is the exception where we only believe the second set of Eidim. So if I come with another Eidim and say women killed Shimon, and you say, no, you couldn't have said that because you weren't there, you were actually in another town at that time. So the halacha is that we don't believe me at all, only the second set of Eidim who came along and said the Eidim Zemin, and we kill the Eidim who gave false Eidim. We'll talk about it. Let's get to the Ikon Kudus. So the point is like this. There's a special Gzir Sakosov that there has to be Eidos Shat Yochel Azimo. Every Eidos has to be an Eidos that you can make it into Eidim Zemin. An Eidos which you can't make it into Eidim Zemin. Even if the reason is only a technical reason, then the Eidos is no good. For an Eidos to work, it has to have the potential always to become his Eidim Zemin. Now, if the Eidim come along and say, we don't know which year it was, is Eidos Shat Yochel Azimo? No. Why not? Because how can you say you were with us in another town? They'll say, but which year? You don't know, even which day. So Rashi asks the question. Then let's say they say we don't know which day of the week it was. So, but we know it was that week. We know as Parshas told us, we just don't know which day in Parshas told us. We know it was the month of Kislev, we just don't know which day of the month. Why can't you have Eidim Zeimim by saying the whole month of Kislev, you're with us in Hong Kong? So therefore, I can give Eidos that I managed to somebody kill somebody. What's wrong? It's still Eidos Shat Yochel Azimo. Again, the Gemara says the reason why by Chakiros, if one of the Eidim says we don't know, we cancel the Eidos, is because you can't do Eidos Shat Yochel Azimo. But by B'dikas, it's still Eidos Shat Yochel Azimo. In fact, Rashi, you can still, says Rashi, because you're limiting in the Hazama. You're making it very, very difficult to have Eidim Zemin if they're going to have to find the Eidos for the whole day. I shake it by saying which hour it is. So now, if you say it happened at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so now we only need to find Eidim for 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's much, much easier. It's important to be aware. What happens if you've got two Eidim and only one of them becomes Eidim Zayim? Let's Reuven and Shimon come along and say Levi killed Yehuda. And Reuven is found out that he wasn't in town, it was in London. What do we do? And what do we do to Reuven?
Nothing.
Very good. We don't kill him. Why do we kill him?
Because the same way as the same way
Well, because it's not Eidim Zayim, you have to have both. It's not considered Eidim Zayim. Okay. So the Gemara says like this. V'yomus. We're up to now the fourth line. V'yomus. If you say people make such huge mistakes, as we said, according to now, either 2 or 3 hours, even by if we said, let's say it was 5 o'clock, he says, when you have 5 o'clock, you will be in London. They say, who cares? You said 5 o'clock, I meant 3 o'clock. I was out by 3 hours. We have to have the entire spectrum of the mistake. So if he says, let's go to the morning, he says after the 3rd hour of the morning. Now you must remember, we're going to Shitta Svava now. According to Shitta Svava, says you make a 2-hour mistake. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you make a 3-hour mistake, right? So let's say they said it happened again. Let's say the 2nd hour of the day, or the 3rd hour of the day. So we have to give them the entire spectrum of the mistake. So the Eidim that want to be mazim them, let's say we want to come along and be mazim them, what do we have to say? You couldn't have said that Reuven killed Shimon in Manchester, because on that hour, you were in London. But they can't say that hour, the 3rd hour of the day, because it wouldn't help them. They have to say how many hours. They have to say, according to Rabbi Meir, 2 hours forward, 2 hours back. According to Rabbi Yehuda, 3 hours forward and 3 hours back, and say the entire time you're with us in another town.
Why don't you say something else? You're in such a situation where it would be impossible. You're in such in point A, where 3 hours. I'm not sure you said London.
Yeah, that's how, because you can't travel that far.
It's not shy.
That's it. You're in Australia and you can't possibly get back in time. You're right. Yeah, yes, that would be the same. But it has to be that it's impossible to travel that time. Yes. Oh, very good. The answer is but it's this is the most we can do. We can't get better than that. If they say we don't know which day or which hour, we could get better. We could get them to find out which day, which hour. Here, the fact is that we're limited. Oh, we'll see this limit. Okay. So the Gemara says like this: we'll give them the entire mistake. Now the Gemara makes a cheshbon, 2 cheshbons, which is important. That even though a mayor says people make a 2-hour mistake, as you'll be hinting at, people don't make a mistake between night and day. And they don't make a mistake between before Chatzos and after Chatzos. So therefore, even though we have to give them the entire spectrum, it's not an entire spectrum of 6-8 hours, but it's limited. Why is it much more limited? It says, well, you give them from the 1st hour until the end of the 5th. That means that's how long they have to be considered out of town. Or we didn't know today, really, we should give them an hour before the day break. Why? Because they said that it happened in the 2nd hour. That was the story of Amir. Amir says, one said 2, one said 3. So that it happened in the 2nd hour. Now, if it happened in the 2nd hour, it could have happened at the beginning of the 2nd hour, which means it's only an hour after the day started, right? Let's say 6 o'clock in the morning starts, the 2nd hour is from 7 onwards. So if he says the 2nd hour is somewhere within the hour of 7, from 7 till 8, so it could be 7:01. So you have to say, if you want to be mazim them, you have to find somebody from 5 o'clock in the morning, which is still night, to be elsewhere. Why don't we need that? Because nobody would make the mistake of saying it was the 7th hour, or the 2nd hour of the day when it was really still dark. So God says, we didn't do this, so we're going to call it fade. Really, we should give them even into the night. And don't make a mistake. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to give from the 1st till the 6th, because he was talking about a case where they said from 3 till 5. Really, we should give them even more. Elo, that means top of your base with base. They told ancient people don't make the mistake. Or we didn't do this, we should even give him later, because the second one said it was the 5th hour. And if it was the 5th hour and the person makes a mistake up to 3 hours, so we should give him all the way into the mid-afternoon. In the 5th hour it's in the east, in the 7th hour it's in the west, and the person is not going to make such a lot of mistakes. Here there's quite a lot of Nekudas from Rashi and Tosfos. One of the Nekudas is very sensitive from Rashi is like this. Let's take a case very slowly. One aide came along and said the 3rd hour, one came along and said it was in the 5th hour. Aiden came along and said that to the person who said that it was, they said, you were with us in the hours of And you were with us in the hours of, let's see the words of Rashi. You were with us the third, the fourth, and the fifth. Right? That means they said to the third person, one who said it was an hour of the three, you're with us in the third, the fourth, and fifth in another town. So what's he going to say? I'm not an Eidim Zimrin. Why am I not Eidim Zimrin? Third, fourth, and fifth. But he said it was the third hour. And he said the third, fourth, and fifth, you're with us elsewhere. Why is it not an Eidim Zimrin? Because he could have meant earlier, because they make a mistake in either direction. So he says, no, actually, I see, you're right, I was with you in another town. When I said the third, I must have made a mistake. I meant either the second or the first, and therefore that's why. Says Rashi, but what's going to happen now? If you remember, Yehuda says they make a mistake of up to 3 hours and no more. Now the other one said the fifth hour. But because of the Eidim Zemimin, he was forced to say, if we are forced to understand that when he said 3, he actually meant 2 or maybe 1. Yeah. And if that's the case, the gap between him and the second has become too big to overlap. And if that's the case, the Eidos will be parted. There will not be Eidim Zemimin. But Eidos Mukheshes will now become. Oh, that was just what I was about to say. Very good question. Just last question. Let's get this Nekuda first clear. Again, when Rabbi Yehuda have an argument, what's the spectrum of people making mistakes? The Gemara says, according to that, when you want to do Eidim Zemin, you're going to have to find that Eidim Zemin come along and add quite a chunk of time that you're away with us. You can't just say you're with us for the hour. You have to add to Rashi that when two Eidim are contradicting each other, one says third, one says fifth, and the Eidim Zemin come along and they manage to find that they were actually in another town at some of those hours, you may end up with a situation that they're not Eidim Zemimin because they can say, well, we meant a different hour. But what will happen is you have no longer an Eidos because he said the third hour and we said the third hour, you weren't there. So you're going to have to come along and say, okay, I meant the second hour. Well, if you meant the second hour, now the gap between you and the other one, you see, before we said that 3 hour gap, they can make a mistake. But if the other one was going back a bit, you can't make that mistake anymore. That's so this asks a kasha, which Dolly asked, is let's add another chunk of hours. Make it like 10 hours chunk. Why? Because the two Eidim that gave the Eidos made a mistake. Let's say, let's talk about normal case. Let's make it easier. One said 8 o'clock in the morning, one said 10 o'clock in the morning. Let's stick to those hours. Eidim come along and say, no, that you're actually with us from 8 till 10 in another place. Maybe the Eidim Zemin, we're actually thinking of 6 to 8.
You can't post.
No, but you want that the Eidim Zemumin should put to death the first set. So in order for that to happen, they should say we were with us for like 10 hours, and then that way we know for definite that it's impossible that because Eidim Zemumin make a mistake of 3 hours, they make a mistake of 3 hours, then you've got much more. Answers to this is I want to mention other cases earlier. The thesis is that we don't say 2 people made a mistake. We say that 1 person made a mistake. And the Eidim Zemin, they themselves are not contradicting each other. They're actually saying the same thing. So in order to make it wrong, they say that they both made a mistake, and that we don't say. Oh, that as the just last that. I mean, they say that both. Oh, what? That means again, even 2 Eidim to say they said there's some mistake we don't do. 1 person might make a mistake. 2 people don't make a mistake. Okay, so now we're finished with the whole Eidos business. All we established from this whole Gemara, which we put half yesterday and today, was what? That Eidim come along and say something, they make mistakes. According to Rava, they make mistakes of up to 2 hours. According to Amir, 3 hours. According to Abid, according to Abba, it's much less of a time. So more or less, say one side. Tana. You have to burn it at the 7th hour. So Amir says he's not allowed to eat for 2 hours before Abid. People don't make mistakes. And we just explained that each person meant the last of the. He said 2, he meant the end of the 2. He said 3, meant the beginning of the 3. Let people eat the entire 6th hour because he says that people don't make a mistake with time. So what's wrong? The Torah says don't eat from Chatzos. Let's everybody eat till Chatzos, the minute before Chatzos. Are you going to say that people make a small mistake? Let's eat till a few minutes before that. Furthermore, let's eat half an hour before Chatzos. A person makes a mistake for an hour and a bit. That means, in the Machlokas of Eidos, we said that according to Abai, people make very, very small mistakes. Very small mistakes. We only allow for a mistake of a half an hour maximum. And yet in our Mishnah, we're telling people to stop eating 2 hours before Chilas Chometz. Why so long? Answers Abaya, Omar Abaya, Edus Mesur Lezvizim, Chometz Lekol Masur, which you put that a little bit before. And Edus requires somebody with a bit of knowledge to be able to come and give some Edus. He has to know something. So therefore, such people don't make big mistakes. The Chometz, every time they can now, is going to be eating Chometz. And therefore, we need to make sure that nobody makes the mistake, Chas v'sholom, of eating Chometz after Chatzos. So if we tell people that that's it, that the minhag is not allowed to eat from 1 o'clock, you can eat till 12:30. There's going to be people around that 12:30, they don't have watches in those days. They'll think that 1:30 is 12:30. So therefore, by people, the general population, we have to be more machne and separate for longer. Oh, we'll see in a minute. According to Rava, that says 2 hours. You should be allowed to eat from the beginning of the 5th. Why does he only forbid 1 hour? And more, hey, oh, Rava says who's got much longer time periods. Why by Meir does he only hold of 1 hour? He should say 2 hours and maybe even more. Why now Mishnah is only forbidden now? Answer is like you said, that the sun after Chatzos goes into the west. If you say that everybody can see when the sun goes to the west, let's eat all the way till Chatzos, and we'll notice it the last bit. In the 6th hour, the sun is in the corner. Now, the simple pshat of the Gemara means that the 6th hour of the day, midday, is not a good time to eat. And really, it's very logical, because when the sun is directly above you, so then it's okay to eat. It goes 1 tiny degree past, it's after Chatzos, it's awesome and to eat. The ability to be able to tell exactly above you or not exactly above you is very, very, very minute. And therefore, since it's mamish at the time where it could be also, therefore we forbid you the entire 6th hour, because you can't tell whether the sun is actually past midday or before midday, so we ask for the whole 6th hour. Only Rashi's bothered that the Lashon of the Gemara, it doesn't say that the sun is in the middle. The Gemara says the sun is in the corner. What do you mean the sun is in the corner? Why is the sun in the corner midday? So Rashi tells us a little bit about astronomy, which we've actually had a couple of times, both in Brachas and in Shabbos, yes, and in Nevin. At the end of Brachas and the beginning of Nevin, and bit of astronomy, which is very, very straightforward, is that the sun very, very, very rarely goes over the top. Where does it actually go? It goes around the side. That means the sun rises there, goes up a little bit, and sets there. It doesn't go over the top. It only goes over the top in the equator. Everywhere else, it goes on the side. So therefore, in England, Rashi is like this. Rashi says, when does the sun go over the top? Rashi is in Tammuz. You should just be aware that in England, it never goes over the top. It goes 23 degrees. It never goes more than about 20. It's very low in England. But therefore, since in Nissan, it never goes over the top, therefore, it is the... I just want to say very, very briefly, a very interesting logic Rashi says, very interessant logic. He says that when we talk about the amount of time you're allowed to eat chometz, we say 2 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. Which hours are we referring to? Shozvanius. Very good. Shozvanius can range quite a bit. Sometimes they're very long, sometimes very short. In our Gemara, we talk about Eidim, and they say Eidus, and they say that Reuven killed Shimon the 3rd hour of the day, 4th hour of the day. Do they mean Shozvanius, or do they mean what we call hours? He just says not like that. I also was wondering about that. He says it's highly unlikely that people where the day always relying on Shozvanius. Now I'd say to you, when you meet me at 9:30 in the morning, you're going to have to take out your calendar and spend ages working it out.
Tell me, I'm eating the 4th hour, is different.
You meet me tomorrow on the 4th hour. What time is that?
I can't do that. But those days are new because Krishna and everything else.
I know. It's very, very hard. Again, you must remember, it's not enough the sundial will tell you the sun here. If I would say to you, okay, sunrise, sunset, fine. He says, therefore, what's the Gemara comparing hours to this sugya? It's 2 different questions. In fact, the hours could be different, and therefore, so he says, which time of the year is in this sun? It is the time when the sun is actually 12 hours. Because it's between the 2 tkufas. Tkufas Tevis, the day is the shortest. Tkufas Tammuz, the day is the longest. So actually, in the Pesach time, shows manias, is approximately 60 minutes. So therefore, it's not the kasha. That's what he says. It's an interesting logic. I know, I was a bit surprised about this Eidos. I also wondered by Eidos. He says it's impossible to say that Eidos, when they say fourth hour, fifth hour, they mean, because then he says like this, if that's the case, you're going to say that in the summer, people make bigger mistakes than in the winter. In the winter, people make mistakes up to 2 hours, only about 80 minutes. In the summer, they make a mistake up to 3-4 hours. It doesn't make sense. Of course, we mean hours of Eidim, we mean 6 minutes. Okay. But Maisa Surashi says like this, that the sun is in the corner. Why is it in the corner? It means midday. So it means the Gemara literally means you can't tell before midday and after midday. The reason why the Gemara calls it the corner is because the sun doesn't actually go over the top in this sun. It goes round the side in this. And if you look at it very carefully, you think, okay. It says, well, that person can make a mistake of up to 3 hours. You shouldn't be allowed to eat from the 4th hour of the day. Why not allowed? The Gemara says, hey, everybody can tell the difference between the 4th hour and the 7th hour. It's no problem. So you should also be allowed to eat in the 5th hour because you can tell the difference between the sun in the east and the sun in the west. It says, well, think about Eidos for the same logic we had before. That regarding Eidos, people are limited in the mistakes. But regarding Chometz, we need people to be aware and therefore fit. The logic of Abiyud in our Mishnah has nothing to do with mistakes. It's nothing to do with mistakes. Really, you could eat Chometz all morning, all the way to the Chatzos. The reason they forbade it was, we don't want people to be so busy eating breakfast that they won't get around to burning the chometz. And burning chometz takes time. You need to collect wood, you need to light a fire. So we stop people eating the chometz in order that they should go around collecting wood to make a fire. Says, well, the correct way to get rid of the chometz is burning. They wanted people to go and gather wood, so they said, stop eating and go and get wood. When do you have to burn it? That is before the biur. When it comes to the 6th hour, that means the time when you have to burn it, get rid of it in any way you can. So if that's the case, why do you need an hour to get the firewood? At that time, you can do anything, you can throw it into the sea. So if that's the case, you don't need firewood to go and collect it because of the fact that when it comes to the crunch time that you have to get rid of it, you can get rid of it in any way you want. Yeah, but it is contribute. We're going contribute. No, the most saying even the contribute, even the contribute, it's only at before. But once it comes to the actual time of destruction, you can do what you want. We're scared of a cloudy day. And just when the person asks the questions, like Adam as well, a cloudy day. Why did Rabbi say Adam, which is 7th? And one said 5, one said 7. We don't believe. Maybe it was a cloudy day. So he says, because of course, that we're not going to kill somebody on the smach that maybe it was a cloudy day and made a mistake between the 5th and the 7th hour. We'll assume that it wasn't a cloudy day. They were contradicting each other and they're liars. But Chometz means in both cases, we're like by killing somebody, we have to err on the side of caution to make sure that we are sure they didn't contradict. And since one of them said 5th hour, one said 7th hour, it looks like a contradiction. Actually, by Chometz, we're concerned about a cloudy day. So even in the 4th hour, you shouldn't be allowed to eat because a cloudy day, we said before that according to Rabbi Yehuda, people make a mistake of up to 3 hours. And we explained the reason why you're allowed to eat in the 4th hour is because the sun's in the east and then the sun's in the west by the 7th hour. But if you're going to maybe there's going to be a cloudy day, so you shouldn't be allowed to eat even in the 4th hour. People, the stomach dictates to them that it's time to eat. And therefore, since they know it's breakfast time, they won't get mixed up. That means the digestive system is aware now is the time to eat. So therefore, they were making a mistake between the 4th hour and the 7th hour. Just with the again, it's very interesting. The lot of it with on Pesachim. Now, if that's the case, why did he say that Adam can make a mistake of 3 hours? Why isn't their food telling them that they wouldn't have made such a mistake? One of them said that it was the 4th hour, one said it was 6th hour. Why should you make such a mistake? So he says, no. He says a different logic. He says, here we're discussing when to tell them people to eat. So then such a thing is, we know that if we tell them eat at the 4th hour, since that's the normal time they're eating, and therefore they'll expect, they won't make a mistake and suddenly only eat much later. Actually, by Eidos, it's not discussing food. The Eidos was, they saw a story, they went and saw a traumatic event during killing Shiur. So in such a case, they weren't thinking about the food. Now what says that, talk about Shiur is showing that the 1st hour of the day, that's talking about between 6 and 7 on a normal day. Machalutin, that's when cannibals eat. Cannibals are very, very hungry. They're always eating all the time. And most people, when they wake up in the morning, don't have an appetite immediately. But these people, they do. Shiur, the second hour machalistim, robbers are up all night, and they love eating, Rashi says, because that's why they're stealing, because they like eating. but they need to rest because they've been stealing all night. They go to sleep for now and then they eat breakfast. People who inherit a lot of money, they don't need to work for a living. Since they don't need to work, so therefore they can just roll out to bed the third hour and straight away eat. Workers who have to work, they only start in the fourth hour. The Chachamim work harder than workers. If that is true, also by nowadays. So therefore what happens is, therefore, they only eat by the fifth hour. Papa says that the fourth hour is the normal time to eat. The fourth hour, that's when most people eat. That's when eat. From then on, is like throwing a stone into a jug. Many of the Shem also the same shot. If you've got a big barrel or jug of wine and you want it to look full, so what's a good way to make it full? Throw stones inside it. It makes the wine look much higher, but you actually haven't got any extra wine. The same thing, a person eats in the wrong time, it looks like he's feeling full. But the reality is his stomach hasn't actually gained from it whatsoever. This situation is no good for a person if he didn't eat anything in the morning. If somebody ate something early morning, less long, but then it doesn't matter if he eats late in the day. If you eat nothing all day, you only start eating after the 6th hour, that's no good. So I'm going to explain the Shach out of the tiny bit. In our Mishnah, we have a discussion how many hours before when the Torah forbids you to eat chametz should you stop eating. We have a machlekes 1 hour or 2 hours. In Sanhedrin, we have a machlekes regarding edus, and the machlekes there is 2 or 3. There's 2 ways to understand this. One way to understand it is that there's a machlekes within the machlekes. Many times we have it in Shas, a machlekes within the machlekes. And machlekes tanoim regarding another machlekes tanoim. So you could say our Mishnah holds that people make a mistake of 1 or 2 hours. The Mishnah Sanhedrin is a different Tana, and that Tana holds make a mistake of 2 to 3 hours. Another way to understand it is that our Mishnah has different cheshbonos to that Mishnah. That means it is true that they're both discussing how much do people make mistakes, but the machlekes is dependent on the fact of how much of other cheshbonos, like we said before, that chametz like kol masur, that is more people are involved, so you have to be extra machmir. Comes the Rav Ashi says like this: our Mishnah is the same as the other Mishnah. There's no argument. That's what we've been saying all the time. That it's the same. It's the same shitta. As Lord says, don't think that it's a machlekes tanoim between our Mishnah and that Mishnah. And that our Mishnah doesn't agree with that Mishnah because our Mishnah holds that people making less of a mistake. No, the same Mishnah is the same Tana. Only our Mishnah is discussing a situation which is chometz where everybody's involved. And since everybody's involved, you have to extra machlik. But the sheresh hadava, the root of the issue is exactly the same. The Rameh says people make less of a mistake, and the Yehuda says people make more mistake. And that's why they argue about chometz. If one of them says they happened before nets and one says after nets, even though it's only a half an hour apart, it does some potato it is bottom. Obviously, they're obviously lying because one of them said, I saw it before the sunrise. The other said, I saw it after sunrise. It might only be 20 minutes apart. But the fact is, they're obviously contradicting each other because nobody can make such a mistake. You make a mistake if it's 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning. You can't make a mistake for sunrise or after sunrise. One says it's before nets, and one says it was during nets. Says, well, it doesn't potato. Well, now you can't make a mistake whether it was before nets or during nets. It's the same thing. As the says, no, they're both meaning the same thing. That means they both actually saw the exact same story. The one who says that it happened during nets is not arguing the one that happened before the nets. He was standing in a place where it was glowing, where it was light. He just saw rays, meaning like this. But MS, they actually happened to see the exact same edus. And they're not lying and they're not contradicting each other. So why did one of them say it happened before nets, one said before, during nets? The answer is it happened before nets. But even before nets, what happens is the sun rays, even though the sun is actually below the horizon, I actually won't see it. You ever stand after the sea? What happens is you see the sun, even when there's no sun there, you can still see light coming out. So the one who said that it was nets, he just happened to make a mistake thinking that it was nets, but really it wasn't. Kamash Shalom, no. Kamash Shalom, we say that they're actually contradicting each other and that they're lying and it's no good. I was hoping to do a little bit What's the time now? The exact time? 2 minutes. Let's just do a tiny bit more. Pass like a computer that what? The 4th eye you don't eat. The 5th eye you're not allowed to get. You're allowed to get pleasure, etc. And then afterwards you put it. Let's say like Rameir, because it's a stam mishnah that's now called Shor Shmut Lecho. Whenever you're allowed to eat, you're allowed to feed, which means that at the same time which is forbidden to eat, you're not allowed to enjoy. Mach is to give it to your animal, which is a form of pleasure. So the Mishnah says clearly that Issa Achila and Issa Hano, the Issa to eat and Issa to benefit come exactly the same moment, which is not like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda differentiates. He says 1 hour to stop eating, 1 hour to stop getting pleasure, 1 hour to burp. So he loves Stomahu. That Mishnah is not a stam Mishnah, it's not like Rameir. Why? Which is the kasha mutter. It's a subtle question. The Mishnah says that whenever it's permitted to eat, it's permitted to get pleasure. It could have been easier to have said, when you eat, you can get pleasure. Why does it have to say permitted? Because of that question, the Gemara there answers that if you remember, we had in our Mishnah, Gamil says that for Truma, which is Kodesh, we give an extra hour. We give an extra hour. So the Gemara explains that Mishnah in Kol Shor means as follows. When it is permitted for A to eat, meaning for the Kohen to eat, it is permitted for someone else who's not allowed to eat, the Yisrael, to get pleasure and feed it to his animals. So that Mishnah is not going not like a Meir and not like a Yehuda. It's in fact, it's going like a Gamliel. Which is the kasha mutter, because it's kasha, because the Mishnah says mutter. Because the Mishnah says mutter, we were forced to say it's neither a Meir nor a Yehuda, it's a Gamliel, but says that the Kohen, when the Kohen is allowed to eat, it's allowed to get pleasure. So if that's the case, say that because it's Stam Mishnah. And also, whenever we have 2 opinions and there's one person in the middle, we always go with the one who makes a compromise. So Rabbi Yehuda said you're not allowed to eat for 2 hours and 1 hour you're not to get pleasure. So if 1 hour, Gamliel differentiated between Chulin and Truma. So he makes like a sort of compromise. So that's Pastor Gamliel. And so Rashi explains a compromise is if I mention a topic. If let's say a Meir mentioned Chulin and Truma, and Rabbi Yehuda mentioned Chulin and Truma, and Gamliel differentiated between the 2, that's called Machriya. But Rabbi Yehuda never mentioned Chulin and Truma, and then the Meir never mentioned Chulin and Truma. Since neither of them mentioned it, Gamliel was the first one to bring up the topic of Truma. That's not called a compromise, that's coming up with a new opinion. But nevertheless, it's a Stam Mishnah like him. So Tosfos answers that the Gemara later will bring a brisa, not like Gamliel, and therefore because of that we do pass Gamliel. So far we've said that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and the mitzvah tomorrow, straight after Shachar 8:05 Berach, we will carry on. I want to get all the way to the Mishnah. Motzei Shabbos will be starting the mitzvah which is a special Jewish celebration. Very exciting.
Sure.
What?
Whole